In this episode, I'm going to cover loading page JSON data into the list view. I'll start off by fetching page data using an offset and a limit. Then I'll display loading until the data is returned. After that, I'll decode the JSON into a list of objects and show how scrolling will fetch more page data, and scrolling back will fetch cached data. So to get started, I'm going to go to Android Studio. I've created a simple basic project and it has a home page. In this home page, the scaffolding is a material app, so its body is a text widget at the moment, and I'm going to replace this with a list view. Okay, so to get started, let me scroll down a little. I'm going to replace this with the list view, so I'm going to go list view, and I'm going to hoist this variable up. And you can nest it if you want, but in this case, I'm going to hoist it up for this tutorial. List view equals new list view, and I'm going to use the builder to create an infinite list view. So builder, this is the builder constructor, and it automatically completes item builder, and it's a null to start. And what I want to do is format this or change the formatting, and this will allow me to build an infinite list view. And what is an item builder? You know, in a moment, I'll show how to get the JSON data, but I want to construct the list view to get going. So the item builder, let me command click or control click, depending on your operating system, and IDE, of course, as well. And it's an index widget builder. And so what is an index widget builder? So I'm going to command click on that as well. And it's a type def. And I consider this an interface because I can come from the Java world, but it returns a widget. So this tells me how to build a function that has the context parameter, index parameter, and returns a widget. So what I like to do is just copy this, copy the signature, parameter signature, and I'm going to go back to my main library. And I'm going to paste this here because I'm going to do an anonymous inline function, and that returns an item, or a widget in this case. So I'm going to go new list tile, which is a nice way to build an item, list tile. And the list tile, I'm going to give it a property called title, or this is an argument for the constructor for list tile. And what do I want to provide it? I'm going to go new text widget, and this text widget, I'll just say item. Well, there's another parameter I need for the builder constructor, and that will be item count. So I'm going to auto-complete it. And then I'm going to say my private variable total will give it the count, and then I'll give the internal state variable. I'll define int underscore total equals 0. Well, actually, I'll say 3 to start with, just to show that it's working. Okay, so I'm going to auto format this, Command Option I on Mac, and then I'm going to Command Save, auto save, which will hot reload it. It's the same as pushing on the icon button up here, or the lightning icon, and if you push that, it'll hot reload as well. So let me see. Okay, item 3 items show up in the list. So when the build method renders, it will build 3 items. Okay, so what I want to do is actually get items from a database, a remote database. In this case, I'm going to emulate it in some context here, but I'll show you in a moment what I mean by that. So, and I'll come back to this and how I'm going to get data and render that data in my items list. So to get going, I want to fetch data. So I'm going to emulate the process. I won't do an HTTP request, but I will do a future that will emulate the process per se. So I'm going to say, what do I want to do? I'm going to go future. This is going to be my return value, which is a string. It'll return some JSON in the future, some later time, and I'll call it get datas. Oh, get JSON. That's get datas is next. Get JSON, and I want to provide an int offset and int limit. So I only want to get a page of data that might be 5 records at a time. So the offset may start at 5 in the record set or the data set, and it will limit me 5 records in that data set. So I call it page data. That's why I'm saying page data. So let's say I want to return some JSON, and I need to import the future library. So I'm going to hit Alt Enter on my system here. and it brings up the autocomplete list. So I'm going to import library dart async, and it imports at the top here. Okay, so back to this JSON. And so what I want to do, I have another error I want to show in a minute. So I'm going to go string JSON equals, and that should complete, well, write my statements in a linear fashion. I have to add the async keyword over here, async operation, so that I can write it in async. Otherwise, it's a like callback pattern. So now I can write in a linear statement fashion here. And what I want to do is provide an array of JSON. So I'm going to start the array, and then so JSON. And there may be ways to write this better, and I'm not going to cover that. So I'm just going to use simple context or simple patterns to write my Dart today. And you know, every time you write your program, you can make it more efficient and less verbose per se, because I could go var JSON and it can infer that this is a string. But I'm gonna be specific and declare my types in this tutorial. So anyway, so let's go. That's the ending of the array, and then I want to provide some objects in my JSON notation. So I'm going to go for int I equals the offset. I want to start at the offset, and then I want to go to let's say I is less than offset plus the limit. So it goes through the range of items I want to create for these for the JSON object notation. So then I want to go to and then I++ for incrementing. Okay, so then I'm going to go JSON plus equals, and I'm going to do some single quotes here because I'm going to use double quotes to define my JSON properties. So there's my object, and what I want to do is do string interpolation with the double quotes in a minute. Okay, so then the next thing I want to say ID. Okay, I could put quotes around ID, and that's going to be a property. So I'm going to put a colon, and then I'm going to provide it with a value with another. This is going to be a string value, so it's going to have double quotes as well. So I'm going to do ID, which is going to be. I'll work this backwards a little bit, and you'll see here in a second. So comma for another property, and then I'm going to put value is this is going to match my object that I'm going to build here in a minute. And value, okay, quote, double quote, colon, and then, okay, so then I'm going to do interpolation again, and that's going to be a value. And okay, so that's going to be my object, and I need a comma, and I'll add that in a moment. So let's go string ID equals, and then I'll just say the integer I to string as the ID, and then which will be the offset value of the record set. And then the value, let's say string value is equal to, let's say value is, and then I'll put parentheses with the ID as just to show me that I have some item with that's unique value that gives me the impression that represents a unique data value in the record set. Okay, so nothing special here. It's just a simple data object that I'm going to call data here in a moment. And the last thing I got to do is add a comma. So if not the last record, I'm going to add a comma because no trailing commas in the items. Okay, so how do I do that? I'm going to say if I is less than offset plus the limit minus 1, because I have less than up here, not greater than or less than equal to. And then I'm going to say JSON add or append comma. Okay, so that looks right. If it's not, I'll get an exception in my JSON parser in the JSON decoding. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is translate this into a list of objects. Before I do that, let's define my object. So I'm going to go class data, and this is going to be a simple model here, and I'm going to provide string ID just like my property up here, and string value just like it up there. In this case, I want to instantiate this, and I'm going to use constructors to instantiate a named constructor. So data.loading. You'll see how I use this in a moment, and this is just going to say value is equal to loading, and that'll be an empty data. So then I'm going to say how do I feed the JSON to this or construct it with JSON? And I'm going to use a map. So I'm going to go data from map named constructor, and I'm going to give it a map, and I'll call it a map. And this map, I'll be able to initialize these variables with ID equals map, and then I'm going to access the key value of the map with ID, and then I'll say value is map with another key value of value. Okay, awesome. So I'll come back to how I use these name constructors in a moment. Now I want to do is, it's going to be a little bit redundant here, but I just want to show this for this tutorial. There's a lot of different ways to get data, and I'm emulating getting JSON. And of course it's in the future, but I have no duration or delay. I'm going to add that here in a minute to show you the effect of emulation in this process. So I'm going to mock getting JSON from a remote server using an offset and a limit, pretending I get this from the database or a REST request. Okay, so I'm going to go future because I'm going to convert this into a list of data, and this in the future I'm going to get datas. I'll make it plural. It doesn't sound right, but it will provide context. Okay, so I'm going to say offset, same as the get JSON, but in this case I'm going to get data. I'm just going to convert the JSON to a list of data. Okay, so int limit, and the same thing here, async, so I can write it in a linear fashion. So, and then I'm going to return datas. And what I want to do is, okay, so the first step in this process to get data, so let's just finish this off. So list, I'm going to define it. So I could go var our datas because I don't need the left side type declaration in this case. It's only verbose to describe what I'm doing. But in this case, so list datas equals new list. And there's different ways to instantiate the list, but I just want to make this verbose so you can see what I'm doing in this tutorial. Okay, so datas, that's complete. So at the first step, I need to get the data. Let's say, all right, var, which is a string. Let's say string JSON equals get JSON, and I'll pass it offset and limit. But in order to get something in the future and wait till it completes, I got to say await. So that's going to wait for this future item to be completed in the future. So now I have JSON. It waited for that. So the next thing I could do, and I'm not covering how I'm going to deal with exceptions here. That's something else I'll cover in another tutorial in the future. So the next thing I want to do is convert the JSON into a list of maps. So I'm going to go list. I'm going to declare what type I'm using here instead of using var, just so I can show you explicitly what I'm doing in this tutorial. So list map, and it's going to be a list, and then I'm going to say equals to, and I'm going to use the Json.Decode, and it's going to decode the JSON into a list of maps. I'm going to import this library, alt enter in my case, and I'm going to hit alt import library dart convert. Okay, so now the data, the raw string, is converted into a list of maps. A little bit redundant here, but that's okay. This is great for this tutorial, and I think it'll make sense at the end why I did this. Okay, so all right, the next thing I want to do is add this map data. I want to convert this into some usable data objects instead of just having a raw map, because that's no fun. Why don't I just load that list into this data list? And there's probably some other conversion techniques, and I'm not going to cover that. And maybe I don't even need to convert it, but I just want to go through these operations because it might be something useful you can use in your application development, either in pieces or as in a whole, however you want to do it. Okay, so I want to load datas with my list, but I'm going to instantiate the datas and add it to my list. So I want to go list for each, and it's going to provide me a mapped item. And I'm going to say for this anonymous function, I want to do execute and add it to my data. So let's see, how am I going to do that? So datas.add, and it wants a new value of data. So I'm going to construct, and I'm going to say from map. So what I did here is for each item, it provides me a mapped in the parameter. So I have a simple inline function, and its body just has a one-liner that goes datas, which is the list, and add method or function, or I guess it's a method in the class. And then we go and I'm going to instantiate, and then I use my name constructor to instantiate the data object, and I give it the map, which I give it down the map, and then this map says for each ID and value, it initializes the ID and value, and it adds it to my list. Okay, so now how do I use get datas and get my list? So I'm getting an offset and limit, and up here I get an index. It's not a one-to-one here. I can't just get index and get offset for each one. And I want to get datas. I want to get 5 records at each time. I'll call it 5 records my page of data, so I can page each page. I can have 5 datas. But on here, and this is my infinite list. If I scroll, I'm going to be moving through a bunch of records at a time. So this is going to not make sense for a few moments, but you watch. I've got a method here that I can get datas, get the datas, cache it, and load it. Okay, so how I'm going to do that? So I'm going to start up here. I'm going to say here I need to get my data, and that's going to be get data, and I'll provide it with an index. So I'm going to create this function in a moment. So, and I'm going to say data.value will be the item. It's going to be a simple record with only text. Okay, so I'm going to alt enter on get data and create my private function or method, and the methods within the class, the functions outside the class. So I'm going to return data, and what I want to do is go data, and I want to retrieve it from a cache data set, and I'll show you in a moment what that means. Cache data. Let's say cache data, and then I'm going to say index. It's going to be a mapped data set or mapped data. So I'm going to create that. I'm going to go up to the top and add a state variable. So I'm going to say this is going to be a map, and the key is going to be the index. That's an int, and the value is going to be data. And so I'm going to go cached data, or I didn't do a capital there, equals new map int data. Okay, so that's instantiated. That's a bit verbose. I can see that so I'm going to change this to var. Looks prettier, I guess. I only need, what I'm trying to do is just tell a story here. And a lot of times when I'm writing code, I like to make sure the story, it's easy to read code. So it depends on how you want to construct it. Now there's some strategies already out there in the Dart community and how they write their code. And I may not be following that 100%, but in this case, what my whole idea here is just to give you context on how you can build it. And I may flow outside the fish tank a little. Okay, so to move on, I'm going to get cache data. So I'm going to go back down to my get data method. Okay, so that's going to return a null sometimes. So what I want to do there is if data is null, I want to just say data is loading. You know, it's going to be in a loading state. So I'm going to instantiate this with equals new data, that loading. And so that instantiates the data. Okay, so let's just test that to see if this function is working properly. It should say loading over here. And let's go, and I'll hit run from the beginning, and it should say loading. Okay, awesome. All right. The next thing I want to do is say total. I want to fetch the total records from my record set. So I'm going to change this to 0. And then I want to say when the state is initialized, init state, I'm going to fetch that. So I'm going to go get total. And then when it returns, I want to update that. So I'm going to go down. I'm just going to create this to start. Create method, get total. And what is going to be a future and returns an int. And sometime in the future, it's going to get a total from wherever it's going to go off and fetch it from. Let's pretend it's going to be a database server and return, let's say, 5 records at this time. Okay, so 5 records, it's going to return. Oh, I need to add the async function, so I can write it and as such here. Okay, so now I'm going to fetch some total in the future. I'm not going to add a duration. I could do wait for a duration of time to fake or emulate or mock the getting total from a database. Okay, so let's say up here, I didn't mean to write this like this, so I'm going to return that, or did that because I did the autocomplete. Okay, so get total, then what's then return? It returns me an int value, and that's going to be total. And I want to update the state when it returns. So after it gets total, I'm going to set the state so it updates the state variable, or internal state variable as I like to call it. And I want to say total now is equal to total. Okay, so if I complete that correctly, I can save it. And since it's in the init state, I'm going to hit run from the beginning up here instead of hot reload or save. And you can see that my emulator in the left now has 5 records, because once the init state returns 5, it then paints a new records, because when I go down here, I have total, which loads 5 records because there's get data index. And then the value here, if I look down, just returns that. Okay, so now what is the magic? I got to get the data in record set. So let's say I don't know. I've got to convert and say, okay, so for index 0, let's load the first 5 records, index 5. I'm going to load the second set of 5 records, and so on. So I can scroll and it will continuously load the new data. Now, this might not be an ideal situation or scenario that you may want to use, but it is a scenario that looks like a pretty good solution. You'll see in a moment how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to say when the data is null, I'm going to go, oh, okay, that data hasn't been loaded. So what I want to do is figure out what index, where that index fits in the offset of the page data. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to go int offset, and I'm going to go is equal to index divided by 5 records. And 5 records is going to be my paging offset. And I'm going to skip creating a variable for this paging number. So I'm going to call it a magic number for now. You know, you're supposed to create a variable and put it at the top. But anyways, so, okay, so that I want to return, it's for, let's say, an index of 2, I should have an offset of 0. But index divided by 5 is going to be a decimal number, so I'm going to rip the decimal off by saying divide, and this tilde here converts it to an integer value. So now this is divide. This operator with tilde returns an integer value. Okay, so I know that the offset, but this is not complete because I got to multiply by 5. So let's say index is 3 divided by 5. That's going to be a decimal number, so that should be 0. Times 5, that's going to be 0, so that'll be the beginning offsets. If I had 7 divided by 5, that's going to be 1 times 5. That's going to give me the offset of 5. So perfect. Okay, so now I know my offset. Now I need to say, have I loaded this offset already? So if, okay, I've got to have another map to track which data offsets I've already loaded. So I'm going to say offset loaded. It's going to be a map, so it contains a key of offset. Or if it doesn't, I need to load the data. So I need to create this variable. So I'm going to go up and create another state variable. And I'm going to say var, my offset loaded is new map, and it's going to contain the int for offset and Boolean, just a filler for if it's loaded or not. And I only need to know if it's loaded, so it's going to be null if not. Okay, so it's going to return false if it hasn't loaded. So I want to load the data, but before that, I'm going to say, okay, I have loaded the data in this case because it's running through this statement or this conditional, and say, okay, so I'm going to put the offset value, offset, and I'll just say is true. Now, why did it do a function here? Now, if I go command click and put up here, I can see it has a type def inline in the parameter. Okay, so if absent returns a value. So that's why I did the function. Okay, now let's fetch the data. Now, assuming the data returned and failed to return, I could return this back and say false. In this case, I'm just running the routine as simple as possible for this tutorial, and I'm not covering all the edge cases here. But in this case, okay, so now I want to load the data. I want to go get datas, and all right, get datas, and I want to provide an offset, which is the offset I just defined up here. And the limit, which is going to be my 5, I want to put here. Okay, so now I've gotten the data. What do I do with it? So I'm going to go then, here's my list values. This is why I converted it earlier in the process. And I need to complete this, and I'm going to do a function in here. Well, wait, I think I'll extract it and provide a private method instead of doing an inline. So I'm going to return to do some formatting. So instead of doing it all within the parentheses here, I'm going to extract it. You can do however you like in your coding. In this case, for this tutorial, I want to extract the method. And what do I need to push? Okay, so I'm going to return the data. I need to do a little bit here. Okay, so data, and I'm going to say datas, and I'm going to send this to a method and do, okay, update datas. And I need the offset, and I'm going to give it to the datas. So instead of just doing update datas, I want to provide it the offset as well. So I have to make an inline function to get going. Okay, so I'm going to say delegate to this method, update datas, and I can say returns void here. Oh, auto, it's not completed yet. Did that earlier, so I'm going to hit enter, complete. Okay, now auto completion is done, or auto assist. And I'm going to say void update datas, because I'm not going to be returning anything. So what I want to do with the datas is here, I'm going to iterate and add this to my cache data. So I'm going to say for int I equals 0. And you're probably wondering, why don't I use a for each? Well, you'll see here in a second. And then I'm going to go I is less than datas dot length, and I increments for each loop. And then what I want to do is go cache data. I want to add it to my cache data set. That's a mapped, and that's going to be, let's say, dot put, and I want to put the key as I. Oh, and then I'm going to go offset because I want to do the offset, but I'll say offset plus I. And then if it's absent, I'm going to do an inline function here and say datas and retrieve the item at the index in the list. You can see I did I is starts at 0 because my list is only 5 records long, or 3 records. And so it will go to the length and I. So that way I don't get an index out of range exception here. So, but I've got to say, okay, it matches the offset plus I and the record set. Okay, there's one piece that I'm not showing here yet. Now let's just show, will this update the data? So I'm going to hit, this will actually fetch the data and retrieve it and then update the datas, but you can see it didn't work. There's 2 problems with this. Is one, the total is updated here, and that triggers with a run from the beginning. And then I've got to also say, oh, I miss set state. So I'm going to add set state. This tells me I updated the state variable, and then we'll repaint the new data that was just loaded from the record set and into the cache data. When it repaints, it will refetch the get datas and get the cache data this time. So let me just start from the beginning, and we should get 5 records, and there we go. That's pretty cool. So now that I've fetched the data, you can see that set states, and we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 records. 5, well, let's say I have a bunch of pages, and my total is now, let's say 10. Well, let's do an 7, just for an odd number. and I'm going to save. That should hot reload it, and you can see the icons blink up here, the buttons blink. So the hot reload button, the icon, a lightning icon, will do the same thing. So let's just hot reload it. Okay, the hot reload doesn't do it, and that's because I've changed the value that happens on init state. So I got to re-init the state. So I'm going to run from the beginning, and we should see 10 records. Okay, no, I set it to 7. I was going to set it to 10. Okay, so awesome, 7 records. Well, I'm going to see what happens now when I set it to a larger record set, let's say 100. And save it for hot reload. Oh, I got to run it from the beginning because I set the value. Okay, so there's 100 records. Okay, well that's boring. Well, let's pretend we get some delay in it, like any server or any remote device would get. And so what I want to do is say, okay, the JSON's going to be taking longer, so I'm going to go future, new, future, delay. And that's going to give me once a duration, so new duration. And I'm going to say seconds property or argument is going to be, let's say, 3 seconds. Okay, now there's a problem here. If I'm writing asyncly and I want to add a future, I've got to add a wait because I want to wait for this future to finish before it completes this future, the future method. So I'm going to save it, and we should see a hot reload here, and we should see it. So in this case, the data is already cached, and what I want to do is I'm going to stop the process and restart it because I want to see that data because it's already cached into the state. So I'm going to restart the process to get the idea here to show that I have a duration of 3 seconds. So now it's rebuilding the application from the beginning, and we'll load it up. Okay, so the app's loading back up, and we should see a delay here. Okay, now we see a delay loading. Okay, the values have loaded. Now both pages, 10 records were loaded pretty fast. What happens if I scroll down now? It should load the other record sets or pages of data. You can see they're loading every 3 seconds. Now that's pretty cool. So you can see the pages and level. What if I scroll real fast? Now, in this case, it's going to take a little bit to catch up, but you can kind of see this is pretty cool because we're working with set state after we load the data by pages. Okay, so let me review the process real quick. I've gotten to where I want to go in this tutorial, and so I'm going to review the process of what happens or what I'm doing. Okay, so I've constructed a page, and this page, it has a total amount of items I want to draw in this infinite list, and I use a list view with a total count that's fetched from a remote server emulated or mocked. And this item builder fetches the data by index. As I scroll down, it fetches and builds each widget, and it fetches that data. So that data, then let's go to get data. Well, that data says, okay, I need to get this index by data. Oh, if I look at the cache data and try to get the data, okay, it's null. What I want to do is then figure out what page I need to load from the database, mocking per se. And if it's not loaded, I want to fetch it, and I'm going to say, okay, I fetched this data, and I'm going to get the data. And so I say it right off the bat because as you're scrolling, I don't want to trigger it again. And if it fails to return, I would return this to false. So another trigger could happen during scroll. Just saying, in this scenario. I didn't make a constant value for this 5 or the 5, so I could change it to, I want to load 10 records. I could change the constant value. I didn't do that in this tutorial. I just did it real quick. And so here we go. I like to point this out because this is a pretty cool operator. It's a division operator with an integer conversion. So this is much faster from what I've heard. Okay, so get data. I'm going to fetch the data from the remote server per se, mocking, and then I want to add it to my cache data. So what does get data do? So if I go down, I fetch the JSON first. I wait for this future to return, and it has a delay of 3 seconds. And I just mock getting data. I can have an HTTP request here. It's another feature that I wait for it to return some raw JSON value. And I may need to do something else. But I generically use string interpolation to build some objects and add some commas here. It may be a bit verbose for this tutorial, but I just want to show the effect. So get data, I get the JSON, and I say, make me a list. And this list is a map. The map data represents the JSON at this point. And then I just convert it into data. And this is a little bit redundant here too, because I have 2 iterations going on. One to create the values, and 2 to get the data. But in this case, I'm mocking, and then I'm instantiating or converting it to some useful object or model I can use in my items. And I don't necessarily need to convert from map to a model. I could just keep it more raw and basic. And so I use the for each operation and map and send that map and instantiate that. Okay, so then back up to get data, or down in this case, because I created it later in the process. And so then I just say, okay, then I provide it with anonymous inline function, which delegates to another function or method. And I'm going to go update data, and then I send it offsets and data into the method parameters. And I get the offset and data, and I say, okay, set state, because I'm updating the internal state variable for my widget, my stateful widget. And I just use put if offset, and I say add, okay, tell me which index it represents in the data set, and I give it the value of data and retrieve that from my list of data. Okay, so set state draws it back. It updates the screen, and you can scroll and you can see it updates, and it doesn't matter where it is. And let's say I wanted to change the total to 1,000. Well, I've now changed the init state, so I'm going to need to run from the beginning. So I run from the beginning, and I can see that it's loading now. That's pretty cool, and I can continuously scroll infinitely, and it just keeps fetching the data and updating the data as I scroll. Now that's a pretty cool feature that Flutter has, or you can do. So one of the caveats I didn't cover is cache data is constantly growing, and I didn't cover recycling this data in this tutorial. So what you would need to do if you are constantly scrolling, you would need at some point recycle the data. So you could come up with a data recycler that says everything before the last 10 pages, if I'm on page 20, delete the first 10 pages. So you could easily write a iteration to enumerate and remove the records that you no longer are scrolling through, and return them back if you come back to them. So just keep that in mind. This tutorial wasn't meant to say this is the perfect solution for caching data and infinite scrolling, because it doesn't recycle the data as if the nodes were recycled when you scroll. So just keep that in mind. So that concludes this tutorial, this episode on using the infinite list and loading data for our page data. Thanks for watching today. Follow me for more tips and tricks, and I'll catch you later.